I will start by telling you to introduce yourself for my viewers, for them to know who we are with. Tell us who you are, what do you do, and where you're from.
Good evening. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm very privileged that you invited me. My name is Tario City. I am an Afrikaans speaking white South African. I live in Worcester in the Western Cape. It's a beautiful town in the Breede Valley, mostly wine farms. I'm a qualified educator. At the moment, I run a small homeschooling tutor center. And also, I'm very keenly interested in politics.
Okay, today we're going to be focusing on the recent actions of Donald Trump inviting Afrikaners to the US as the refugees. That's what I want us to focus on. For some Americans who don't know the history of South Africa, how can you describe the arrival of white South Africans in South Africa? How did they arrive there?
Well, the first white South Africans that arrived to settle, not, so I have to specify, they did not come here with the view to colonize the place, unlike the whites that went to the USA. The white people, the Europeans that came to South Africa, were employees of the Dutch East India Company, and they landed here on the 16th of April, 1652, with a view to start a halfway house, a halfway stop for the ships, the trading ships en route from Europe to India. Because as you know, it was a very long and dangerous route. And Cape Town, what we now know as Cape Town or the Cape, had a beautiful harbor. It had ample fresh water, and the Dutch East India Company, which was a multinational company, in fact, one of the richest in the history of the world, they decided that they had to make use of this space to enable and help these ships on their route. And they settled here. They immediately built a fort and they started farming. And within 20, 50 years, they had some slaves because there was so much work to do. And most of the white people who are Afrikaans speaking are descendants of those Dutch employees of the Dutch East India.
What role did Afrikaners play during colonial times and in the creation of apartheid?
For the first 100 years or so, it wasn't a republic, it wasn't a colony, it was an outpost of a major multinational company managed by very corrupt administrators. And as the population grew because of the economic needs, some things were also happening in Europe. It was the time of the Napoleonic Wars, and the French and the Brits and the Germans, to a lesser extent, realized that this was a very strategically important spot, the Cape of Good Hope, mainly for trading. And there was a short war between the Dutch and the Brits, but in 1806, the British Empire took over the Cape Colony. And by that time, there was a significant community of white people who saw themselves no longer as Europeans, but they had sort of their own identity. They saw themselves as, they called themselves Boere, Hollanders. There's not very clear records of when the first person called himself an Afrikaner. And I have it, the history books that I've studied. Apparently, there was a drunk Dutchman. One evening, he was making a noise in the streets, and one of the police officers, this was in the late 1700s, one of the police officers accosted him and said, "Shut up, you're making a noise." And he said, "I'm an Afrikaner. I will do what I want."
Oh, that's where the name came from.
That is that's definitely one of the documented origins, yes. But these people were very independently minded. You can imagine they had a strong sense of identity. They were Calvinists, they were white, and they spoke a different language. They spoke a sort of watered down Dutch that they spoke. It was, for a long time, it was called kitchen Dutch because it wasn't acknowledged as a formal language. So in 1806, the Cape Colony became part of the British Empire. By now, there were white farmers settled quite far in the easterly direction, say about 1,000 kilometers away from Cape Town. And these farmers were not happy to live under British rule. There were many reasons. One of the reasons was that the Brits decided to free all slaves and abolish slavery in 1835, and these people did not like that. And they felt that the Brits were too literal towards the black-speaking and the native populations, because despite the fact that the Brits were in conflict with the Xhosa population from early on and with the Zulus in KZN, KwaZulu-Natal. In the meantime, in 1867, there were diamonds discovered near Kimberley. Of course, now the Brits had something to go for. And in around about the 1880s, gold was discovered in the Witwatersrand. Now, these areas by now have been settled by the Afrikaners, who by now call themselves the Boers.
What did those Boers do?
Mostly farmers. They were an agrarian society. And then when gold and diamonds were discovered, the Brits had a big interest in these two Boer republics. So I skipped a lot of history in between, but in 1899, the British Empire declared, well, there was a war, the Second Boer War, the Anglo-Boer War, between the two Boer republics, the Free State and the Zuid-Afrikaanse Republic, or the South African Republic. The Brits, of course, beat them. They were surprised because it took them the best part of 3 years. And there were several atrocities. One of the things that Afrikaners will speak about to this day was that the British Empire under Lord Kitchener, because they couldn't get the men to stop fighting, and it was a guerrilla war, it was a militia. Because they couldn't get the men to stop fighting, they had to stop their supply of fresh food and medicine and horses and such. So they burned down the farms and they put the women and children and non-combatants in camps. These were the first concentration camps, and that's what they were called. And more than 20,000 women and children died in those camps because of the horrific conditions. Now, this was something that really shaped the Afrikaner identity from 1899 to 1902. There was a brief period where there were 4 colonies in South Africa. It was the Transvaal, the Free State, the Natal, and the Cape Colony. And then in 1910, we became a union. By now, the Afrikaners had, to a great extent, taken over some of the power that they had, and they started to campaign politically. So the British government was also very racist. There was no racial equality in the colonies under the empire. But what happened in 1948 was that the Nationalist Party took power, and they were very strongly Afrikaner, very much based on this idea that the Afrikaner is God's chosen people, and that he saved us at the Battle of Blood River in 1838. He has been with us, and the Afrikaner had a very strong racist policies of racial segregation, and they saw themselves as the superior race. And from 1948 until I'd say officially by the late 1980s, apartheid had begun and the laws had begun to change. But it was still officially, that was when the heyday of apartheid was, from 1948, I'd say, till about 1980, when there were many racially very unfair legislation. And that was also the time of the struggle with the ANC and people like the PSC. The Afrikaners didn't invent apartheid, but we perfected it.
Who invented it first?
First colonizers did. The Dutch, the English, if it can be called invented. But what the Afrikaners did was, by making all these petty laws that there's an entrance for black people and there's an entrance for white people and colored people go there, we entrenched it so deeply into our society. And yes, it was terrible, and I don't think there's any excuse for it. We are all products of our time. And I don't know what my views would have been if I was 16 in 1960. I have no idea. But the Afrikaners did contribute to building South Africa into an industrialized country.
We're talking about their contribution in apartheid.
Well, we perfected it. We perfected it. I'm sorry that I have to say that, but we did.
So, what's the similarity between apartheid in South Africa and segregation in the US?
I think apartheid was even more strict. There are very great similarities. Uh, I just think that number one, it kept going for way longer. So by the 1960s in the USA, the civil rights movement had disabled or had begun to dismantle many of the segregationist policies. The other difference between South Africa and the United States is that in the United States, you have different states and they had very different legislations. States. But so there were states that were more liberal and some that were more conservative. But in South Africa, the apartheid laws applied in every single town, in every single province. It was universal. And it was very strict and it was very petty because the whites knew that they were the minority. Therefore, they had to make these very strict laws to keep their societies pure. Ideas behind segregation in America and apartheid in South Africa are very much aligned, but the application in South Africa, I think it was more severe and more strict, especially regarding the daily lives of all white people and all black people.
You mentioned that those Afrikaners were the minority group during the time of apartheid. Are they still considered as the minority group?
Yes, we are. And in fact, I have some statistics here for you. So, according to the last census that was in 2022, blacks make up 81.4% of our population, coloreds 9.2%, whites 7.3%, Indians 2.7%. And then there is an estimate, because the census does not specify Afrikaners as a subgroup, but it is estimated that of the white population of 7.3%, 2.7 million of that is of Afrikaners. So our population is about 60 million. So 7.3% of 60 million. I didn't do that math. So these Afrikaners make up about 2.7 million people of a population of 60 million. So we are definitely a minority.
Okay. So we've heard claims from some politicians and media in the US that white farmers are being persecuted in South Africa. As someone living there, what's the proof behind that?
I can emphatically say that white farmers are not being persecuted in South Africa. They are not, the farms are not being confiscated. They are not being persecuted. And I've looked up the latest statistics. And let me just put on my
No problem.
So these statistics are actually based on documents that are made public by the Transvaal Agricultural Union, which is a union of white farmers.
Okay.
So the statistics, according to the statistics of the White Afrikaner Farmer Union, and I'm going to give it like this: the murder rate in South Africa is 45 persons per 100,000, which is very high. That's the overall national murder rate. Now, if you look at farmers as a subset of the population, the murder rate per 100,000 for farmers is 4.57 per 100,000. And interestingly, in the USA, the murder rate is 6.5 people per 100,000, which means that white farmers in South Africa are on average safer than the average citizen in the USA. And if you look at the last 7 years, the rate of the murder rate of farmers has dropped to 2.7 per 100,000. So there were fewer farmers in the past. The number of farmers has steadily, slowly decreased. Therefore, for anybody to, it's actually laughable that there are people who say that there's a white going on. I want to emphasize that there's two ways of looking at this. The one way is the statistical, so many people die per 100,000. But then we must remember that one person that is for the family and the friends of that person. That is terrible. And many of these farm murders are gruesome. I will not deny that. And in fact, I speak as somebody whose, my cousin was not on a farm, not in a farm attack. But my cousin was murdered in his house, and my own brother survived a farm attack. He's a farmer. He's now living in Australia. He was ambushed on the farm where he worked. So I get the fear, I get the pain of the individuals, and I will never, ever not acknowledge that. But when a country makes policy, that should be based not on the individual experiences of individuals, but that should be based on empirical statistical evidence. And I think that's a distinction that the government of the United States is not making. And I think it's a very important distinction because the USA is basing policy decisions on emotional responses of people who went through trauma. And that's just not the way for countries to make policy.
Quite insightful. Do Afrikaners today face any government discrimination or land grabs, or this is mostly political messaging?
Land grabs? No. There have been instances of homeless people and jobless people seeking on vacant land. That has happened. But those people do not discriminate whether the land belongs to a white farmer or a black farmer. And because most land still belongs to white farmers, when land is unlawfully occupied, it is often the land belonging to a white person that is unlawfully occupied by black occupiers. And that has caused conflict and trouble, because when you have a piece of land and you get there one morning and you see there's now 10 shacks being put up overnight because these people don't have anywhere else to stay, then yes, that is definitely a problem. But that is not a land grab. And in most of those cases, those farmers have legal recourse, and there's ample evidence that the police, black police officers, will help white farmers to remove those unlawful occupiers from their land. And it becomes a legal issue, and it's resolved by law, by due process. So no, there are no land grabs in South Africa. Maybe cases of unlawful occupation.
Okay. So what do you think about Elon Musk? Elon Musk, I think, is one of your people.
Because Elon Musk is about a year older than I am. We went to school in the same era. I know exactly what his school days must have been like, although he was in a different province. Here, Elon Musk, as the wealthiest man in the world, could make a massive contribution to solving South Africa's greatest problem, which in my opinion is our massive unemployment rate. But Elon Musk is not interested in doing that. I think Elon Musk's racist credentials have been verified quite well. We do know that his family held very strong pro-Nazi beliefs. And it's obvious that Elon Musk hates South Africa. I'm not sure why. Maybe because he was bullied by some white boys at school. Now he hates the country. So perhaps I shouldn't say too much more about Elon Musk, because I might get sued.
Okay, that was enough. Some MAGA politicians in the US are now supporting white South African immigration. What do you think about this move?
This, to me, is on two levels. I know many friends, I know many family members who have left South Africa for various reasons. My own brother is in Australia. He's been a UK citizen and he's now in Australia. So I do not blame anybody for leaving South Africa to go wherever they want to, wherever they can be accommodated. I do not blame those people. I wish them all the best. The problem that I have with what is happening now is that the term refugee, which is a legal term, it's a term in international law, and it's also a term in South African and in US law, I presume, to give those immigrants the status of refugee is, in my opinion, criminal. Firstly, it's criminal towards all the refugees around the world. People who really suffer, people who really have nowhere to go, who have nothing, and who are being threatened every day. It's a slap in the face of real refugees to call these white Afrikaners refugees. For them to go and for them to be, I mean, any government, I suppose, can welcome into their country wherever they want to. But by giving them the designation of refugee, the USA is also making my country look bad in the world. And I know Donald Trump has called Africa shithole countries, but this is my country. And yes, we have many problems. And yes, there are many things I'd like to change, but we are not a shithole. And for Donald Trump to give these people the designation of refugee, he is doing active harm to my country, and also he's very negatively influencing race relationships in my country. And that makes me really, really angry. And the fact that these immigrants are going on the ticket of refugees means that they are also giving a particular impression of what's happening in my country. And I don't think that is a correct impression. And that is what I disagree with. I don't disagree with people fleeing. If they want to say they're fleeing, they can flee. But these people should go over on the same ticket that any other person that finds a job in the United States goes over there.
Yeah, I think that is enough. Now, these immigrants truly experience farmers, because I've been seeing some Americans saying that because the farming industry in the US is struggling right now and they're having some issues. So some Americans were saying that maybe Trump is trying to import these farmers so that they can help in reviving farming industry in the US. Are they experienced farmers, those immigrants?
I don't think anybody knows because very few particulars have been made known. What I can say is that I'm not a farmer and I applied, and when you apply for this refugee status, there's nothing about being a farmer as a criteria. So anybody can apply. The only criteria is that you must be of a minority group.
White?
And that you must, it does not say white. It says of Dutch, French, or German descent.
But they are white. All of them are white people.
I agree, but we know the games that we know the games politicians play. The word white doesn't appear anyway. But being a farmer is not one of the criteria. Now, having said that, I've only done my first application thing. I don't know what the questions are, and I don't know what the sifting process is. So I don't think anybody knows whether these people are actually farmers. So I definitely don't know, and it would be really nice to find out whether they are farmers.
Okay. The most Afrikaners actually want to leave South Africa, or is this just a small group of people who want to leave?
So let's look at the stats. If we assume that there are 2.7 million Afrikaners in South Africa, according to the USA website, only about 70,000 showed interest in seeking asylum. So I think it's a relatively small group. It's definitely not near the majority. And something I can just say that I found deeply ironic. So one of the organizations that really pushes this narrative of white side and whites being discriminated against and farm murders is a civil society organization called AfriForum.
AfriForum.
They AfriForum. Yes. If people could look them up, they're very vocal, very prominent. They actually have sent numerous delegations to the USA to push this narrative. They've been on Fox News. They've been on Tucker Carlson's show numerous times over the past 5 years or so. In fact, they were in at the White House in January, February this year. And what I find deeply ironic is that when Donald Trump made this announcement that Afrikaners now have refugee status, AfriForum came out and said, no, we don't want Afrikaners to flee the country. Stay here. We just want, what they actually wanted was for the USA to sanction the leaders of South Africa. That was what they wanted. I don't think they wanted this asylum project. I think they were quite surprised when Donald Trump announced that, because you can imagine that an organization like AfriForum, they don't want whites to leave, because the more whites in South Africa, the better for them. So it's deeply ironic that that they've now encouraged the whites who are already in the minority to leave, to go to the States. But they have made, I mean, they've publicly stated they don't want to go. They don't want people to go. They don't want Afrikaners to go. They just want the USA to pressure our government to stop being racist. That's basically what they're saying.
But is your government really being racist, or it's something that is being made up?
Look, I don't think there's an easy answer to that. Then yes, it could be argued that our government is racist because we do have what are called BEE policies. That's Black Economic Empowerment. I would say that there is discrimination when against people who are white and Indian and colored when applying for certain posts and positions, because there's an attempt to redress the injustices of the past. Now, I personally don't see that as racist. But I can understand, if I put myself in the shoes of a white person who was used to privilege, that looks racist. And I must say that when I fill out a form and I have to indicate my race, I wish we could have moved past where that is necessary for me to indicate wherever I go on any form that I fill out, I have to say whether I'm white, black, African, or Indian. I don't like that because I don't like being designated by the color of my skin. But then I have to acknowledge the fact that I don't like it does not mean that there shouldn't be ways of redressing what happened in the past. And it's not in the past 30 years or it's over the past 300 years. And then I just face reality and go about my life. But I can say that as a white, Afrikaans speaking South African, I do not feel discriminated against. So yes, that I can understand that some people do feel that way. I think it's because they respond emotionally. I think it's an emotional response. I don't think it's a response based in fact. And when people apply for jobs and the black guy gets the job and the white guy doesn't, of course he'll say it was racially motivated. And whether or not it was, I don't know. But I don't think that our government is overtly and explicitly racist against white people. I don't see that.
So is that BEE the same as DEI in the US?
Very much, yes. It could be compared to DEI in the US, although it's more focused on race. I'm not sure how much DEI is focused on race, but in South Africa, Black economic empowerment is definitely very much focused on race.
Is there a real unity between the Black South Africans and white Afrikaners?
I think that for the most part, in my daily experience of day-to-day life, and it also in the experience of my parents or elderly, of my family and friends, I think there's way more goodwill across racial lines than Donald Trump would have people think. You know, I I attended an event not too long ago, and I've been at many events where I'm the only white person in the room. I've never felt threatened. I've never felt discriminated against on a personal one-to-one level. Most people m- that walk past my house, most people that I meet in the shops are people of color. So in the Western Cape, we have a large colored population, and so most people I meet and have experiences with are people of color, and I have never felt threatened or discriminated against. And if you look at what happens in our schools are fully integrated for the most part. There are such good relationships. Um, so I can only speak to my experience. People who are fearful tend to have bad things happen to them. Uh, it's I've never been afraid of black people. I've never had bad experiences with black people, and my house has been burgled. I've caught a thief in my house. It was a person of color, but it's not. I wasn't threatened by him because he was a person of color and I was white. He was a thief and he wanted to take my stuff. To me, it's got nothing to do with being black or white, because I'll tell you one thing. On the topic of crime and the rate of black people is more than twice as high as the rate of white people. And talk about minorities. The colored population, of which there's 8.2%, the rate amongst colored people is extremely high. And I wonder if the Trump administration will grant refugee status to the many colors in South Africa who live in gangster-ridden areas where they are almost daily, if not by stray bullets, just by gangsters fighting and gangsterism. So I really wonder what would happen if those colored Afrikaans-speaking South Africans applied for refugee status. And that brings me back to what we began to speak about, what is an Afrikaner. And that's a little bit of a conundrum, I think, potentially for the United States government. Because these colored people, who are people of mixed race, they speak Afrikaans. They are the descendants of Dutch and French and German immigrants who intermarried and had relations with the native people of South Africa, and slaves, of course. Oh, they're Afrikaners. They're a minority group, and they speak Afrikaans. And they're descendants of Europeans. Will they get refugee status? What will the criteria be when they fill out their application form? And I'm really curious as to what the Trump government will do if people like that apply.
It is said that there are some cities in South Africa where black people are not allowed to get in, like to enter. Is that true?
There's only one such place, and it's a privately owned community. It's called Orania. Your viewers can look up. There's quite some few programs about Orania on YouTube. Some of them made by Black Americans who went there to see what it's all about. Orania is a community. The land was bought by this trust or company, and that is a community where only white people are allowed. But rest assured, I won't be allowed to live there either because I'm an atheist. So even though I'm white, I won't be allowed to go to, I can enter, I can drive through and I can visit the shops, but I wouldn't be allowed to live because I'm an atheist. So, okay, so there is such a place. And in fact, my relatives farm 10 kilometers away. I've been there many times. I'm very familiar with the place. And my sister-in-law was in an it's so petty that she had two of her farm laborers with her, and one of them needed to use the bathroom, and he wasn't allowed to use the bathroom because he's a person of color. So yes, but it's only that one place. There is no other place in South Africa that I know of where one would be denied entrance because of the color of one's skin.
What would you like Americans to understand better about Afrikaners?
Afrikaners have a strong sense of being chosen, of being unique, of being special. They are mostly very religious, Calvinist Reformed, and there's a sense of racial superiority that has been ingrained into most Afrikaners. And that is something that I can identify with, because I don't think maybe Southerners in the US will understand this. But we grew up with two great dangers. One was the red danger, that was communism, and the other one was the black danger. It was the swart gevaar, the black danger, and that was black people. And the stories that were drilled into us as children, and it is part of our history. I mean, this really did happen. There were of white people by black people. We did have bloody battles in the 1800s. And yes, the Voortrekkers did have this fight for every inch of land that they wanted. And that mentality is very much alive in the hearts and minds of those people who regard themselves as Afrikaners. So they feel that they are persecuted. They live with the fear of being a minority, being this small white enclave surrounded by this black ocean. And that's a mentality that many of them grow up with. And it's a one does not realize the effect of how fearful that makes one. And then what has happened in the past 20 or 30 years since the end of apartheid? We do have a massive crime problem. And just because of the way our population is demographically made up, most violent crime is perpetrated by black men. Just statistically, they make up 81.4% of the population.
Yeah.
And so chances are that if you're walking down the street and you are robbed, you will probably be robbed by a black man. Your handbag will be. But that's not because the black man wants to rob the white person. It's just because statistically that's the population. And white people have this fear of black people, and the Afrikaner in particular. And I think much of what they do is driven by this fear that is so deeply ingrained over generations. And that is something that is, to me, it's a very negative way of living. I don't live my life that way. I didn't raise my children that way. But it is a part of many Afrikaners' lived experience.
Okay. That is enough. Because we still have 2 minutes, and I'll have this question that I want to ask you. Do you believe bringing white South African, let me just say white South Africans, to the US is going to hurt anyone, either South Africans or Americans? Will it hurt?
It's definitely, it's already hurting South Africa. It's made us, it's heightened racial tensions that were very much under control. It's definitely heightened racial tensions in South Africa. It's given white people a bad name. It's given my country a bad name. And I think it's also harmful in the United States, because I think it will also heighten racial tensions in the United States. So there's no good outcome. There's nothing good about this. They are just bad outcomes based on bad policy, based on fear-mongering, and malignant narratives.
Okay. But you said you have applied. Why did you apply?
I went onto the website. It's very easy. You just go to the website and you apply.
I mean, what's the reason? Why are you applying to go to the US?
There's only one reason, and I hope I don't get in trouble for this. I just want to see what the criteria is. I want to know what the criteria is. I will not go. I will not go to the US, but I want to understand what the criteria is that the US uses to decide who are refugees and who are not. Because I want to understand the process from inside out. Because I think it's a massively flawed process. Because one of the things that you just have to say that you fear future discrimination. If you fear that you might be discriminated against in future, then you can apply to be a refugee. Where? How does it make? I mean, anybody can then apply for anywhere. Then, so if a refugee is anybody who fear that they might in future be persecuted in their own country, and how ridiculous is that?
Is that written in the application?
Yes, that's written on the application.
Thank you for the insightful information. I think my viewers will be happy to hear from you.
They're welcome to contact me, and I will let you know if and when I hear anything back from the US Embassy. I will definitely you'll be the first one to know what the update is regarding my application, because I think that might be an interesting exercise to go through to find out what exactly are these Afrikaner refugees, what is the exact criteria. So please, your viewers are welcome to contact me. I make new friends easily.
Okay. I will share the link to your Facebook and LinkedIn profile down there in the description. Thank you all for watching. That was it for today. Mr. TA signing off. Ciao.